Scott Steiner is one of the most explosive people in wrestling, and that isn't just a gimmick. He's intense and unpredictable and never afraid to tell someone if he doesn't like them. These are the wrestlers Scott Steiner hated working with. In the early 90s, Bill Watts took over WCW and started running it like a boot camp, which was never going to work on someone like Steiner. He managed to piss off a lot of the wrestlers for multiple reasons, but one of the biggest is that he made them take a massive pay cut, while at the same time also giving his son Eric a push that he didn't deserve. Eric Watts was a terrible wrestler who had no business being on TV, but the other boys in the locker room kept quiet in fear of losing their jobs. Scott Steiner, on the other hand, made Bill Watts fear for his life. One night before a show, he called Watts out to his face in front of all the boys, right there in the middle of the locker room. Allegedly, he told Watts that nobody respected him backstage, and then he called him a piece of shit before ripping into him for pushing his son above everyone else. Watts was reportedly left so shaken by Steiner that he started bringing a loaded gun with him to the office, just in case he physically attacked him. Of course, Steiner never had a problem tearing into anyone he thought was full of crap, whether it was Bill Watts or a legend in the business like Ric Flair. Flair was friendly to everybody, but he would stab you in the back. That's the way he is, you know? You can't trust him. See, everybody has a misconception of Flair that he's the biggest prick, you know? It's like the Wizard of Oz with the curtain down. You see somebody different on one side of the curtain than the other. Backstage, he's the biggest pussy you ever met. In the early 90s, Steiner was being considered for a main event push in WCW. Jim Herd was the booker at the time, and he wanted Steiner to beat Flair for the world title. They had a match on TV where Steiner beat him, and a follow-up was booked for the Clash of the Champions show, but according to Steiner, Flair tanked the match on purpose. He deliberately slowed the match down and didn't sell Steiner's offense. At the time, Steiner didn't fully understand what was happening, but looking back, he's sure that Flair sabotaged the match to stop him from getting over with the crowd. We had a match on Saturday night, a TV taping, and I beat him there. Then we had the Clash of the Champions, and they were going to put the belt on me at a later date, but he sat down on me. I was too green to realise what he was doing at the time, because he didn't want to give the belt up. That's just the way he was. It's almost always the biggest pussies who want to have the belt and be pushed the hardest, trust me. By the time the Monday Night Wars rolled around, Steiner was done biting his tongue. In a now infamous promo on Nitro, he went off script and trashed Flair, seemingly out of nowhere. He mocked Flair's age and called him a jealous old bastard who was clinging to power that he no longer deserved. Steiner even ripped into Flair's looks, saying that he should have spent his money fixing his teeth instead of pretending to be the man. He ended the promo by saying that Flair belonged in WCW because WCW sucked, burying both the Nature Boy and the company on live TV. I thought about it for a couple of days and I thought, fuck it, I'll fuck with Flair today, you know? Do an interview on him. So I did it, and I find out later Flair's in the room crying, actually crying. But that's the way Flair was. You've got to see it to believe. And then they actually tried to get me fired. In the end, Steiner was suspended for 2 weeks with pay and then came back like nothing ever happened. Flair says he's a 16-time world champion. Give me a fucking break. I would have been a 16-time world champion if I had all my buddies booking for me. He had Kevin Sullivan and all those guys booking for him, and he was even the booker at one point. And when he was the booker, everyone wanted to fucking kill him. You might remember Terry Taylor as the man who had one of the worst gimmicks in wrestling history as the Red Rooster. But by the year 2000, he'd settled into a job backstage in WCW as a road agent. Depending on which version of the story you believe, he either had to tell Steiner that he was being booked to lose a match, or there was a screw-up where Mike Awesome came out to Steiner's entrance music. Either way, the genetic freak was not happy. Allegedly, he stormed into the gorilla position, screamed at Taylor and threatened him in front of all the other staff. The situation backstage got so intense that they had to delay the TV taping by almost an hour. And it turns out this was a bad year to get on Steiner's wrong side, and Diamond Dallas Page was the next person to find that out. By now, DDP had been a multiple-time world champion, and he'd seemingly worked his way to the top of the business through hard work. But Steiner didn't exactly see it that way. His friendship with Eric Bischoff, that's the only reason he got pushed. He had a little bit of talent, but he had guys helping him too. You've got to understand, where there's a big machine behind you, it's a lot easier to get over. But everybody knows that's why he got pushed. Things ended up getting genuinely violent between the men backstage after an incident involving DDP's wife, Kimberly. The story goes that she found a stash of drugs backstage that belonged to Tammy Sitch. She reported it to management and Tammy ended up getting fired. Steiner was friends with Tammy and he clearly wasn't a fan of snitches, so he confronted Kimberly backstage and ended up chasing her out of the building. Then he went on live TV and cut a nasty shoot promo where he trashed both Kimberly and DDP. Of course, Page wasn't the kind of guy to let something like that slide, and what followed was one of the ugliest backstage fights WCW ever saw. Depending on who you ask, Page might have taken Steiner down at first, but once Steiner got on top, it was a different story. He reportedly tried to gouge DDP's eyes out, and a bunch of other wrestlers had to pile in and break them up. This time around, WCW management didn't suspend Steiner. In fact, they didn't do anything, probably because they were all terrified of him. When Steiner returned to WWE in late 2002, they initially treated him like a big deal. They showed video packages in the weeks before he arrived, and his debut at the Survivor Series where he destroyed Matt Hardy and Chris Nowinski was absolutely electric. The crowd responded to him like a megastar too, and they had Eric Bischoff and Stephanie McMahon fight over who could sign him to their brand. But it didn't take long for the hype to come to an end when he got dropped straight into Triple H's Reign of Terror. This was the era where Hunter was steamrolling through challengers one by one, and Steiner was no exception. From their very first segments together, it was clearly a mismatch. They booked tedious pose downs and arm wrestling contests between them, and it certainly wasn't the kind of intense feud the fans had expected. In fact, it was totally boring. That's the thing when a guy's a mark and he wants to beat everybody. Of course, it does help to be banging the boss's daughter, so, he took advantage of everything that he could, and he beat everybody from WCW. Why? They treated everyone like shit, and we're all in the same business. Wrestling is a small-knit community. It's a brotherhood, but you're going to treat us bad because we wrestled for somebody else. Steiner's beef with Hulk Hogan stretches all the way back to when he first became Big Papa Pump. At Super Brawl in 1998, he turned heel after betraying his brother and aligned with the NWO. This should have been the start of a big push for Steiner, but according to him, Hogan sabotaged it straight away. In his very next match against Lex Luger, Steiner was booked to lose. He later found out from Sting that it was Hogan who made the call for Luger to win the match instead of him. From that moment on, Steiner believed that Hogan was using his backstage power to keep him down, and he never let it go. But Steiner's issue with Hogan wasn't just about losing a match, it was about the way Hogan operated. Backstage, Steiner says that Hogan would show up late to TV tapings and hold up the show until he personally approved of all the finishes. Hogan had enough power to override the bookers, and Steiner saw that as a huge part of what poisoned WCW from the inside. After WCW went out of business, he personally blamed Hogan for killing the company. When Hogan and Eric Bischoff showed up in TNA, Steiner had a sense of deja vu. According to Jeff Jarrett, Steiner went straight to Dixie Carter and told her flat out that these guys were going to wreck the company, just like they did in WCW. Dixie, who was the owner of the company, decided to ignore him, and sure enough, once Hogan and Bischoff got their hands on the creative side of TNA, things went downhill very rapidly. After he was released by TNA in 2012, Steiner went on an expletive-filled Twitter tirade against Hogan and Bischoff, accusing them of destroying the company. Even today, in 2025, it seems that Steiner still cannot stand the Hulkster. In a recent interview with Chris Van Vliet, Steiner opened up about his feelings towards Hogan currently, especially around some of the sensitive comments that he'd made. There's a reason why he got booed in California on Raw. All this stuff that came out with him, racist comments. Now, you would never have found that out if it wasn't recorded behind closed doors. So I think a lot of people realise the perception that WWE or WCW wanted of Hulk Hogan was not really him. The racist comments, Hogan and Savage. I was good friends with Savage, so I knew all the stories, and he used to tell me all the stuff. Then, of course, there was the one time he tried to put me in jail. I was facing serious time. I could have been in jail for 15 years. Steiner's referring to a situation he got into with Hogan's wife Jennifer at the airport after WrestleMania 31. I went up to her and said, "Are you Hulk Hogan's wife?" She said, "Yeah." At that point, he was going to induct Savage into the Hall of Fame, which was bullshit, so I told her that. I told her he was a piece of shit for that whole situation, and I was going to slap the shit out of him. I said that. Nobody heard me. It was very low key, and I didn't raise my voice or anything. I grabbed my bags and left. Well, she called Hogan. He came to the airport, and then he called the San Jose Police Department, saying that I slapped her and I threatened to kill him. Well, that's terroristic threats and aggravated assault. I got a call from the San Jose Police Department. Luckily, it happened at the airport because there were so many cameras, otherwise it would have been her and him against me. So that would have been a tough case in court, but since it was on camera, I told them, "Don't bother me anymore, it's on camera." So they stopped. In the year since they last worked together, Steiner's anger towards the Hulkster has, if anything, gotten even more intense.